Behind me is the Alfa Romeo 4C Spider. This is one of the few cars that will actually increase your heart rate just looking at it. In that same vein, this vehicle has also caused a host of medical issues for people, or most people that are twisting their neck to gawk at it to try to figure out what the hell this car is. If you're someone who is interested in cars, you might worry, is this just another faux exterior? Is this just another wannabe sports car? And let me tell you, it's not. The primary function of this was to be minimalistic and lightweight, just something that is no longer in existence in modern car culture. Almost this entire car is a composite fiberglass material. The front hood is actually not a hood, although it has the seams. My assumption is that they designed this as a multi-piece front end, unlike Lotus cars, to make it cheaper to repair and replace. One of the problems with mid-engine design is cooling. Obviously, you have to take into account that the motor is sitting right behind you. So on the Alfa, we have the actual intercooler on the passenger side, right behind the passenger side door. And you can tell the way that the body is shaped to flow air right into it. On the passenger side, you actually have your air intake duct, which for a turbocharged car, you need to get a lot of air in there because, you know, cool air is everything really when it comes down to it. Now, when you start talking about mass-produced cars, the vehicles that people buy every day, it becomes a total snooze fest because either they all look the same or they're trying to copy each other. In the case of the 4C, this is really a joy because there's so many little details, and minor and major, that you can just sit back and appreciate. We could talk about this for probably 20 minutes, which we won't. In terms of the Spider, we have a carbon fiber reinforced windshield because, well, you're losing the roof rigidity. So this adds some rigidity back and some structure to the car. When you get to the rump of the 4C, this is where so many people confuse it for an exotic. And that's because it looks just like a car that would cost $300,000. And that's actually what you would expect in a vehicle in that price range. But this is not $300,000. It's not even $100,000. This is proof positive that you don't have to spend your life savings to get something beautiful and special. There's just so much going on back here in terms of vent work, lines, just contours, the way it reflects light and just shadows and highlights. It's something, again, it's not something you see every day. Well, we already know this doesn't have an exotic price tag, right? So maybe it's going to have more practicality than an exotic car would, and I'm here to tell you that is not the case. Now, you do actually have a trunk with the engine right in front of it, and this is a very small space. You're going to carry one large, probably carry-on bag in here, and that's about it. Now, because the engine's back here, you'd kind of worry about heat, but the seal does an extremely good job. I actually had my camera gear in here and a lot of stuff, well, minimal bags, and I was very conscious of the heat. And I took a actual thermometer or thermal temperature gauge to my gear afterwards, and it was only about 100 degrees even after driving. So they have done a good job at venting out this trunk space, and it is as usable as it can be. There are no hydraulics back here, which is going to be a pain. You actually have to put this prop rod in here to, you know, keep the hood up from, you know, cutting your head off. But again, they've made some attempts here, but I'm not going to kid you, this is not a very practical car. At the end of this, no amount of videography or photography is going to do this car justice. If you really like it, you have to look at it in person because there's just so much to appreciate. We could go on about the diffuser, the side of the car, some of the carbon accents, all the fiberglass work and all that, but let's just take it to the shop and see what we can see underneath. So when I found out I was getting this vehicle, I only had 3 days with it. Typically I get a week, which makes it very, very difficult to pull off the type of video stuff.
You just want to drive it for 3 days. Who cares about taping it?
Right, yeah. And now I got to spend 3 days straight doing video. But when you saw this, I was a little surprised at the reaction. You thought it was going to be a total chump car.
Mm-hmm. That's
Why?
pretty cool.
Why did you think it?
I don't know. I just watched briefly videos of people. Oh, it's slow. It's this. It's that. But
and then you drove it. What happened?
It put a big smile on my face.
Yeah, and that's
excuse me.
That's exactly why we have it in here. We're gonna take a look at the underbody if there's even anything to see with all the paneling. Scott, we're under the Alfa 4C Spider, and Spider means convertible. It's not the little creepy crawler.
I don't understand that.
Yeah, I don't understand either. Must be.
This should be the Alfa 4C Cabriolet.
It must be some for our Italian thing. So we're in the back, which is where the engine is located. It's mid-engine, and in order to see this beauty, you must remove the service panel or one of the aero panels to get to the oil filter and the oil drain plug. So this is what you see, and it gives you a better shot at the rear suspension, which is strut-based. Now, I know there is a lot of complaining about that because cars like the Lotus are double wishbone in the rear, and the reality is they just couldn't fit double wishbone in the space and make it all work.
It looks pretty fancy for what they were able to do, though.
Absolutely. This is not your Toyota Corolla strut-based suspension. This is quite different. The control arms, your lower control arms are, like you said, just massive and almost race car looking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for most people looking at this, there has to be some type of special lift precautions or a way to lift this car in order, probably involving some type of hockey puck method. Just to be straight, we didn't even try to lift this car traditionally. We just drove it up on the alignment rack, didn't even worry about it. So I don't want to cause any damage to the carbon tub or any part of this car. But if you're an owner of this, you know, obviously you're going to have to go through those precautions to lift it.
Really hard to see anything.
Yeah, it is hard to see anything. But one notable thing is when you get this race exhaust, you get your cat to just a straight pipe out to your dual exhaust outlets. There is no muffler here. It's like the other Fiat that we looked at that also sound amazing.
Mm-hmm. For a four-cylinder?
For a four-cylinder, this is no different. What type of motor are we dealing with?
Four popping 1.75 liter.
1.75 liter turbocharged, and it's direct injected. So how do you get 237 horsepower out of a 1.75 liter? What's the magic?
Turbocharged.
Yeah, but how? Boost? You know how much boost it's running?
No.
22 pounds.
Nice.
They're about 22 pounds. So this thing is just, that's why it sounds so ridiculous too. When you're on and off the throttle, all the burbles and blow off sounds.
Burbles. It sounds like something that I heard next to me at the porta potty the other day.
It does. And you know what, I was driving, I'm like, God, this thing sounds like it's farting and hissing. And that's part of its charm. It's just, it's a hilarious driving experience. That's one of the reasons why it puts a smile on your face. It's not some like super refined like sewing machine four-cylinder under here. But they did build this 1.75 liter specifically for this Alfa. This is not some monstrosity that's been shared about in 100 cars. It's specific to this. This is another car. We're in close quarters together. And since you can't really see anything up here, obviously everything is covered up. You have ventilation here for your radiator, your condensers up here, and this is more than likely the easiest way to service this is to remove this single panel because there are bolts that take this off and slide this panel out to get at your radiator fans and all that. For your Lancia
Well, these will
Alpha.
be a little difficult to get out. Someone looks like they curbed it already.
But when you get under here, of course, everything's covered up. The biggest thing is this carbon fiber tub with the honeycomb in between. It runs the whole from about here to the midsection of the car, and this is where the money is at. Alfa Romeo has this contracted out to a third-party company. They build this entire chassis, the actual carbon fiber part. They do the assembly, the layering, the molding, the autoclaving, the prep, and then they drill all the holes for the chassis mounting points, and they've also integrated other things into this so they can mount hinges and all that. So when Alfa Romeo gets it to their factory, the tub is already ready to go and they just assemble it. So the hard part's already done. But the interesting part about carbon fiber in general is you get into an accident with this, I can't imagine the cost to replace. I mean, you're pretty much going to total this car out. I mean, you'd have to break it apart to replace the tub. It's so integrated into the chassis that I don't know what insurance is, but if you're an owner of this car, I'd like to know what you're paying because that's the hidden fine print of a chassis and a body like this. You have mostly aluminum, mostly carbon fiber, and actually an affordable price range. When you look at all you're getting here.
This thing only weighs like 200 pounds.
Yeah, it's crazy. And speaking of that, what did you say the weight was in America?
2,300, I think.
2,350 or something, right?
Something like that.
Okay, and what is it in the
1,900.
UK? Holy shit. So you think it's all crash?
I don't know. It'd be interesting to see the difference.
I'd like to know what they did specifically between the UK and here to have such a massive difference in weight, unless there's something different about the car physically. But the front, when you look at the suspension, this is true in-wheel double wishbone suspension, and it's very compact. And of course, double wishbone, we talk about this a lot. It's optimal for track conditions or high performance driving because you get progressive camber change. Yeah, that's about it. With the underbody, it's completely flat all the way down. Really cool.
What would you rather have, this or a Lotus?
Well, that answer is
Well,
really
I
simple.
don't even need to ask you that.
I mean,
you have a manual lever in the Lotus.
Yes, that's the reason why I owned a Lotus. And if I was going to buy another car like this again, if I put this next to an Exige S, even a 220, I would take the Exige just because it has a manual transmission option. That's the only thing.
But it can't shift in 1.1 millisecond.
No, yeah, we'll talk about that when we get under the hood. We're under the bonnet or boot
The boot.
or the trunk, the hood, whatever this becomes. It's
the
actually,
rear it's a hatchback.
it's a
bro.
hatchback, yeah. This is where all your storage is, and this is where your power unit is. Now, working on it, servicing it.
I'd rather work on the Miata with something stuffed in it than this.
All right, and that's really the downfall. If you're going to buy this, you better be able to turn your own wrenches, or you better have a warranty or a lease where you're going to take it into a shop. Which leads me into the last part, the manual the transmission, the automated manual, dual clutch.
It's digital shift mechanism.
Yes.
DSM, bro.
You like digital shifting. I'm going to say this, and we just had this conversation. This is not a race car. I understand the concept of having fast shifts, digital shifting, automated manuals that can shift faster than you can, which would make sense if you're wheel-to-wheel racing and milliseconds matter on the racetrack. That is not this car. And everything about it is driver-centric. It's so simple, so cut back, lightweight, manual steering rack.
Yeah, that's one thing I first noticed. I went to back this thing up. I'm like, holy cow, man, I forgot what it's like.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's the best. So as a driver's car, it's a huge failure not to have a manual transmission in here. And I know the PR, the product planners are all going to blow over this. Every interview you see, anytime you talk to them about it, well, why would you want a manual in it? It's a driver's
That's
car.
old-fashioned, bro.
This is an old-fashioned car. This is not new.
It's high-tech. It's carbon fibery.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Composite body.
right. So lightweight sports car, minimalistic sports car is high tech. That's something that was like discovered in what, the 70s and 60s, you know, add lightness. That's what they're doing here. A manual transmission is the weak link. They need it. And I would buy it if it had a manual trans.
I mean, at least it's not a CVT.
Dude, can you imagine if they put a CVT in here? They'd sell one of these.
Can you imagine how it would sound accelerating?
So Scott, just got done with Road America.
We better check some tire temps and brake temps.
Yeah, that was like a month ago.
I thought you just came right now.
No, I'm
that's
sorry.
why I was on the alignment rack.
Now, I'd actually like to know the alignment, but it's really immaterial for a street car right now. The one lap I did, again, I had never been in this car. So as much as it was neutered by the traction and stability control on, as you just said, should I really be driving it with all of it off first time?
You need a good half hour in it at least, probably. And on a track like that, what's that, 3 laps?
Yeah, pretty much. Road America is not the ideal road course for this car. So let's talk about the good. The good is steering feel. That's the first thing you notice in this car, and I wish every sports car had a manual steering rack, but not every car is 2,400 pounds or 2,300 pounds like this is. It's amazing. It's one of the most rewarding parts about this car. The second thing is, this thing is so flat in corners. I mean, there is no body roll in it. I mean, you could take it anywhere and you feel, it has that, I hate when people say it, but the go-kart feel to it where it's just so rigid, you can kind of like steer it with the throttle. It just has this rigid sense throughout the whole course, despite it cutting power out of the turns. Really, really enjoyable to drive and handle. But the biggest negative was power output, and it's really evident. You don't feel it on the street, but on Road America, it doesn't have enough power for those straights there. It just falls flat after you hit 100. It doesn't build.
Of course.
Well, especially when you get out of the V6s and the V8s that I got out of that day. I mean, those cars pull and pull and pull. This thing is just, it gets done after 110, 120 miles an hour. Just nothing.
Doesn't compare to that Buick Casada.
Yeah. I actually had them put a cage in the Cascada for me. But yeah, that's about it for Road America. I'd be curious to see what people that are actually tracking this car in shorter courses, like Gingerman, probably Lime Rock, Groton, shorter courses, this would be ideal for.
Let's do it.
All right, let's take it.
Let's throw it in the hauler and let's go.
They don't need this car back. Guaranteed. They probably just gave it to us to keep. I'm going to tell you a quick story. As a kid, there was very few things I could do to find some peace for myself. One of them was driving. It didn't matter what I was in. It could have been a Dodge Caravan, which actually it was. I loved to go out and drive. And over the years, as you grow up and you go through plenty of different cars, I've had some really cool cars, but that effect has worn off on me. I get in a lot of cars and I don't feel that euphoria I did as a kid getting away. Getting in the Alfa 4C has kind of triggered that reaction for me again. I can't wait to get behind the wheel of this car when there's no traffic and I can get on some back roads and just enjoy the connection with the car. No music, no technology, just me driving. And that's probably one of the most special things about this car that is totally intangible, that specs won't tell you, that no salesperson or PR person can tell you. Now with the 4C, I always drive in either dynamic or race mode on the street. This doesn't not have enough horsepower for me to get too crazy. If you're a more normal driver, you don't have a lot of driving experience, just leave it on dynamic. Traction control stays on. You can drive in automatic or fully manual, but for here, we're gonna go through the turns in manual mode. First tendency is understeer. Brakes are amazing. I mean, this car doesn't weigh anything, so your brakes should last forever. You don't need 6-piston calipers that look the half of the size of a 17-inch wheel. Everything works here so well because of the weight. Now this Alfa 4C has a dual clutch, and it's not the smoothest automatic transmission ever. And in fact, when you take your foot off the brake, it feels like a manual transmission. You have to kind of get into the throttle a little bit, and you can feel those clutches grabbing. So if you want a quick launch, you almost have to give it some gas, get the revs up a little bit so those clutches grab, and then you can drop the hammer. When you talk about horsepower, it's because this car is so light that you don't need a lot of horsepower. I think this is about the perfect amount for a street car with this weight. It's so enjoyable to drive on the street. All the torque is exactly where you want it. So right now I'm at 2,500 RPMs at about 45 miles an hour. All you have to do is tip in that throttle and you're thrust back into your seat. And this reminds me, this experience with this turbo and this lightweightness, it reminds me of the Atom 3S that I was just in. Now, of course, it's nowhere near the weight of the Atom or the horsepower, but that sensation of lightweight and just this amount of turbo horsepower is so satisfying for just daily driving. One of the best things about the Alfa 4C, the most important thing about it, is you have a manual steering rack. There's no power steering, no hydraulic, no electronic power steering. So what that means is when you turn the wheel, you're turning the wheel every time. It's not some synthetic feel. You feel exactly what's going on in these front wheels. And it's one of the most satisfying parts of driving this car. Yeah, you can throw out some of the driving refinement, you can throw out some of the quirks and the problems, but that's one of the primary reasons you feel so connected to this vehicle. Now the other thing is, in terms of dynamics and handling, you know, this is set up to corner. You get into these turns and the car feels so flat. There is legitimately no body roll. I mean, it's very little. Its tendency is to understeer, initial understeer. Once you get into the corner, it wants to push, and then if you try to walk it out any further than that, it will start to oversteer and you have to do some correction. But on the street, the understeer is a really good thing. It keeps you out of trouble, especially with the traction control off and all the stability control off. I'd probably set this up a little less understeer prone for the track or autocross. The initial push, especially on tight corners, gets to be a little annoying when you want the car to rotate. But you know, on the street, again, as driving here on public roads, it's not a non-issue. It's funny, you can feel the actual clutch releasing and grabbing in first gear kind of when you're crawling along. It does definitely feel like a manual transmission, the way that this thing behaves. It's not the fastest car in the world, but it's so, I mean, it stimulates all your senses, so you feel like you're going a lot faster than you are. Let's take it through the turns here. You really have to behave with this car. Oh man, it's amazing. Whatever. I could do this all day long, every day, all day. Get me off the street onto a track and I will just drive for hours on end with this car. It just feels so good. So let's take a break for a second. This is where I take all the cars on some choppy pavement. This used to be an amazing area where I could just go flat out through the turns and drive cars, but it's kind of grown into an industrial park and the pavement's bad. So when you start driving around here on this broken pavement, it feels like when you're on a bicycle with the tires totally overinflated. It's very, very firm. Now, the one thing to note is you don't feel cowl shaken here. This feels like a coupe. It's a very rigid chassis, and you can thank that because of the carbon fiber tub. But it definitely is the car that will just beat you up over a while. If you're in an area with really shitty roads where they don't maintain them, this is gonna get old really fast. The biggest problem with the Alfa 4C is this: it's traffic. It's not that you still can enjoy the driving experience. It's just that this car is designed and made for somebody to be driving it flat out, through the corners, through the turns, on a track. And then when you get into traffic like this, it loses its charm extremely fast, because you are stuck like you are in any other car. And then you strip away the comfort level, you strip away the creature comforts, the amenities, and unless you're on a weekend drive, man, I couldn't imagine driving this every day. Getting inside the Alfa 4C, well, this is one of the best and worst parts about this car. Now, for me, since I'm about 5'9", 150 pounds, this is so ideal to my body type. I fit in here. This is exactly how I want to be in a sports car. Now, that said, I've been in a lot of cars, and this is one of those vehicles that, I'm going to be honest about this, if you are wider, you are a heavier person, if you're over 6'2", if you're over 250 pounds, if you're a female and you have really wide hips and you have a big ass, this is going to be a very confined experience for you, probably very uncomfortable and claustrophobic. Now, in terms of ingress and egress, you have a massive side sill here, and that's because you're inside this carbon tub. So getting out of this car, it's not as bad as you would think, but it takes some dexterity. Because not only that, you have these covered pieces of, well, composite material with Star Shield or 3M Clear Bra, whatever you want to call it, over the panel so you don't scratch the paint. I would say that it would be almost impossible to not scratch something up getting in and out of this car, because of the way you have to position your leg and twist your leg and move your other leg around to kind of pull yourself out, you know, and you're really getting up and out of the car and falling into it. So, I mean, that's part of the experience of a vehicle like this. You're not buying this car to be like, well, is it comfortable and does it have the ergonomics I'm looking for? No, this is purpose-built. Interior quality and ergonomics. Now, this car has been out for over a year, and I've seen so many reviews and people complain about interior quality or lack thereof. The knobs and the switches feel cheap. They recycled the steering wheel out of a Fiat. The head unit is a single-din head unit from the early 2000s. It doesn't have the premium feel you'd expect. Well, typically I'd be one of those people that would harp on all this, especially in a mass-produced car. But this is not a mass-produced car. If you're somebody that wants all the fluff, all the electronics, and all the crap, go buy any of the 1,000 other cars that are on the market that just continually copy each other. The vent work, the dash work, this feels more, again, I'm going to compare it to the Lotus. This feels like an upscale Lotus Elise Exige. You have some leather trim. It doesn't feel as bare bones. Things are actually covered in here. It's not raw aluminum and metal everywhere. You have plastics, you have carpeted floor mats, and all around you is this carbon tub. You see carbon fiber everywhere in here. Now, I'm not going to pound smoke up your butt. Even though I said all that, the truth is when you get on a daily grind, a daily commute in traffic where you're stuck on a straight road, impeded, you get a serious case of road rage, because this car loses its charm as soon as you can't drive it how it's meant to be driven. And things like not having a real place to put your phone, minimal storage, cup holders are a joke, no place to put your left arm and no real armrests in here. If you're driving it every day, it loses its charm. And you want to get into one of those mainstream cars with all the fluff that I just said that I wouldn't want in here. This is more of a toy, a car for somebody who loves to drive and that can have the access to roads or tracks or autocross to really enjoy it. It's not a car you would want to put a ton of miles on. But if you live in a good climate and you can use this as a second car, it's going to make you so happy to drive. All right, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of some of the interior items here. First is your feet. You have a pedal box that when you look at it, it looks like something out of a race car. And then you look at it and yeah, it has plastic mounts. It's more mass-produced, but it has an exceptionally good pedal feel. Brake and accelerator, and your dead pedal's huge. Should work with a wide variety of shoe sizes and feet sizes. Your gauge cluster is just a digital screen. It tells you the basics, what gear you're in, RPM, speedo, and it will tell you your different drive modes. It will tell you oil temperature and actual PSI or bar for your boost from the turbo, which when you go into race mode, it goes to this G-force meter, and I haven't figured out a way to change it to your oil temperature, which I'd rather know on the track. There might be a way to do that, but that's something to note. Your vents are just standard rotary style vents. Paddle shifters are kind of cheap plastic feeling. That's probably one area they could probably swap this out and make an improvement without a lot of cost. Your door handles are leather straps, which are great for this car. Works perfectly also as a handle for the passenger when you're flying around. Really, everything is super simple in here. Now next is this kind of quirky like shift selector thing with these buttons. You have 1, which is actually drive, it puts you in gear. You have N, which is neutral, which just that's what you do when you come to a stop and pull up the handbrake. And you have R for reverse. That's your gear selector. Now I thought, why can't they just do it more traditionally or use the paddles to put it in gear? And I really don't know why. It just takes a little bit to get used to once you get in this car for the first time. Then you have A and M, which switches you from automatic for people who don't want to shift, which would be strange, but if you don't want to shift the paddles yourself, you put an automatic, and then you hit M if you want to override it and do it yourself, which I love the manual mode in here. It works pretty damn well. Not the fastest, but it works good for what this car is. Then you have your drive selector mode, which is dynamic, which is kind of your sporty mode without it turning off all the driver's aids. You have normal, which is just what you drive in every day, or all weather, which makes the traction control system and stability control system go into crazy mode. The transmission kind of shifts earlier if you're in automatic. But then there's race mode, it just all driver's aids off. You go from dynamic and then you hold up D, and you hold D for about 10-20 seconds and it will say, hey, you're in race mode, connected, traction light goes off, and it's all you, which is the most fun you can have in this car. At the end of the day, on a personal level, they clearly designed the Alfa 4C for somebody that's like me, who's owned cars that are just uncompromised driver's cars that may not be very good to drive on a daily basis. This is extraordinarily fun if you can fit in it, if you're that type of person that wants a pure driving experience. Somebody that wants to go to the track or autocross more than 2 times a year. It's just so fun on so many levels. But it is compromised, and you have to know that. If you're looking for a BMW experience or a more luxury car experience, that's not what this car is about. The storage capacity, some of the interior quirks can make this a very annoying driving experience if you're doing a daily commute in traffic. But overall, this is definitely one of the more fun cars, more rewarding cars I've been in a long time. At least, namely in cars that are in production today.
This guy carrying his BMW key around, probably walk around with it hanging out of your pocket.
I do, actually. That's the only way I get into Starbucks now.